Hello, my name is Chris Enns. I run Lemon Productions, a podcast editing and production business, and this is my story. On this episode, I want to talk about ways to make money with your podcast. Okay, so this episode was inspired by a conversation that happened inside of a community I'm a part of called Mega Maker. Joshua in there had asked about how much to charge for sponsorship opportunities on a new podcast he was running. And Justin, who runs Mega Maker, chimed in with a response to a link to a post on his transistor.fm website, a podcast hosting company I use that I've referenced a few times. Great company. Anyways, their support doc has lots of great info and tips, and he linked to that post. I jokingly said I was going to read it for the next episode of my podcast, and he responded with, "Do it," which I'm taking as legally binding and that he's not going to sue me for copyright or anything. Of course, be sure to follow the link in the show notes to go read the article for yourself and see all the nice visuals he included, which you can't really see, obviously, by listening to this podcast episode. So here we go. My reading of How to Make Money in Podcasting in 2019 by Justin Jackson. When people hear that Joe Rogan is making $25 to $50 million a year from his podcast, they take notice. However, most folks forget that Joe started his podcast back in 2009. The Joe Rogan Experience was one of the first comedy podcasts, and he did it for years before it made any money. It took him 10 years to achieve the success. So don't expect to get into podcasting and make tons of money overnight. However, if you're patient, you can earn a reasonable amount of income from your podcast. Here are some ideas. Get listeners to support you on Patreon. Patreon is a third-party platform that allows your listeners to support you monthly. Their website describes it best. Fans pay you a subscription amount of their choice in exchange for exclusive content. I actually use it for our podcast network, goodstuff.fm. We have a Patreon campaign at patreon.com/goodstuff where folks can support the podcast network itself and get access to a private Discord chat with podcasters and listeners from goodstuff.fm. And if you do that, be sure to enable the Patreon payment button in your podcast or RSS feed. For Transistor customers, you can automatically add your Patreon link to your podcast show notes by going to your social menu, adding a Patreon donation URL. The link has the rel equals quotes payment attribute, which enables a special donation icon in some podcast players, like Overcast and others. You can also create a membership site. Creating a membership website for your podcast listeners can be another way to earn an independent income. When they join, members get exclusive benefits like access to private forums, Slack chat, and downloads. Back in 2013, Justin launched a membership site for his podcast listeners. Since then, it's earned over $100,000 in revenue. To create your own podcast membership site, you can use tools like Podia, Memberful, or Podfan. These sites allow you to charge a monthly or yearly subscription, but Justin prefers to charge a one-time fee for lifetime access. Another common way is to get podcast sponsors. Because of big names like Joe Rogan and the ubiquity of ads on popular podcasts, many burgeoning podcasters hope to earn an income from podcast sponsorships. The big question is, of course, how many downloads or listens does your podcast need to attract advertisers? You've probably heard ads for Squarespace, MailChimp, Stamps, MeUndies, etc. They all pay between $25 to $100 per CPM, which is per 1,000 downloads, to sponsor podcasts. So if your podcast episode gets 50,000 downloads in the first 30 or so days, a Squarespace ad might net you $1,200 to $5,000. However, 80% of podcast episodes these days get less than 1,000 downloads in the first 30 days. Unfortunately, the big advertisers won't be interested in your podcast unless you're getting 50,000 downloads per month. That's the big business, big companies, corporate podcast sponsors. I have lots of clients who I work with who have 10 to 20,000 downloads per month on a particular episode who are able to charge $3,000 to $5,000 for sponsorship. It all depends on them getting into the right niche and topic, like I talked about in the previous episode. So how do you get advertisers if you have a smaller listenership? Justin, for example, uses Patreon to sell a $250 ad spot for his show on their Patreon. So their podcast gets around 1,900 downloads per episode in the first 30 days. They do 4 episodes a month, so that equals about 7,600 downloads in a month. So their CPM is around $33. They attract advertisers organically because they serve a very specific niche, people interested in the software industry. They'll only feature 2 to 3 sponsors per episode, and they're different than most podcasts in that they don't differentiate between pre-roll and mid-roll ads, podcast ads that are at the beginning or in the middle. They just rotate the sponsors each episode. So can you make money in podcasting? If you're looking to make a quick buck, podcasting is definitely not for you. It can take years to build a viable audience for a podcast. In fact, one of the trends they've noticed is that shows who do attract sponsors have almost always built an audience outside of podcasting. For some, this meant building a large following on Twitter, while others built an audience through their blog, an email list, or YouTube channel. So that's it for the article, and that's a very quick overview of making some money with your podcast. If you follow the link, like I said, to Transistor's support site, he's got links to some podcasts that are earning revenue from ads. And they're not like big brand name, big, huge corporate podcasts or anything like that. Folks who have built an audience and are able to charge some money for sponsors to reach that audience. And he's also got links to podcasts that use Patreon to support their show. And that's it for this episode of The Story Behind the Lemon. As always, if you've got questions about podcasting you'd like me to cover, here's your chance to get them on my to-do list. You can find all the details for this show on the web at podcast.lemonproductions.ca, including the various ways you can subscribe. You can also reach me on Twitter at Lemon Production or on Instagram where I'm Lemon Productions CA. And of course, please feel free to share this podcast with anyone who's interested in podcasting, either personally or for their business. And if you'd like to hear more from me, feel free to sign up for my email newsletter at lemonproductions.ca/newsletter. This episode was written, edited, produced, and mixed by me, Chris Enns. My theme song is from Sounds Like an Earful Music Supply. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye.